Let's do a quick historical survey, a quick historical overview in order to identify and understand a bit the development of linkages among these images of quality, progress, and nationhood. Now, for our purposes here, the question of the German state, the issue of the German state, can be traced as far back as 800 AD, when Charlemagne was crowned by the Pope as emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Now remember that the original Roman Empire itself had fallen long before, 300 years before, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 AD. And the Roman Empire had never successfully conquered, and you probably know this, or integrated the so-called barbarian German tribes to the north. One always heard about barbarian German tribes. The Holy Roman Empire, as distinct from the original Roman Empire, it was something entirely different. An empire that nonetheless spanned for the next 1,000 years a range of ever-changing territory that included much of Central Europe and much of Eastern Europe, as well as northern Italy. This empire, the Holy Roman Empire, was holy in the sense that it was Christian. It was authorized by a succession of popes. Meanwhile, Central Italy remained under the direct control of the papacy. After Charlemagne's lengthy rule, the Holy Roman Empire largely fell apart, disintegrating into competing states with descendants fighting over them. One treaty among Charlemagne's descendants actually divided the empire up into 3 different areas of land. One that corresponds roughly to what is France today. One that corresponds roughly to what is Germany today. And one that corresponds roughly to the terrain that France and Germany fought over for the next 1,000 years. Now, an emperor for this empire was indeed restored in 1250, so 450 years after Charlemagne. But the empire at this point was now largely confined, limited to the greater German territory. So the empire was largely German. This newly emergent empire was also characterized by a different condition, a new condition. The condition being that the states that constituted it would largely be independent of one another. So we have an empire with relatively independent states. Indeed, by the 1600s, or almost another 400 years later, we're rushing through time here pretty quickly, the Holy Roman Empire consisted of as many as 300 separate states, including many city-states. So are you picturing now a diversely organized empire? Each of these states had its own ruler, often a prince, sometimes a king. And each state had its own army, its own laws, its own cultural and intellectual circles. The main role provided by the emperor involved approval for taxation, or a significant role for the emperor. Taxation required approval by the emperor. Now, important contrast here between leadership in the states and leadership of the empire. Leadership in the states was hereditary, passed down from generation to generation through families. This hereditary line of succession largely guaranteed the internal coherence and stability of these states. Meanwhile, the emperor was elected, in turn largely guaranteeing the empire's instability, including regular rival claims for power among leaders of various states. Now, initially, early on, all the ruling leaders from all the states got to participate in the selection of the emperors. But over time, as some states became more powerful than others, this number was reduced to an elite group of 7 electors. Okay, so what's the point here? The major point thus far is that nearly 800 years ago, a structure of independent states loosely connected by an overarching administration had been initiated in the territory that is now called Germany. This pattern, which established a pattern that would continue through to the present day. And this is important to understand. It's important to understand to set up the problem of the nation state in Germany. Now, One dimension of difference among these states was actually religion, especially after the rise of Lutheran Protestantism in the 1500s. These princes were actually free to choose religions for their states, which initiated a developing pattern of separation between church and state. So as you might imagine, while the states towards the south, which were closer to Rome, were more likely to remain committed to Catholicism, the states towards the north, especially in what became Prussia, were more likely to turn to Lutheranism. In the 1600s, other religious sects developed in the German context among these German states. The Calvinism, which originated in France, was added to this mix. Later, the Anabaptists, Mennonites, the Amish. For a long time, for roughly 600 years, the states of this Holy Roman Empire were led by one family dynasty that was based in Austria, the Habsburg dynasty. The Habsburg leaders ruled over the empire from their base in Austria. Austria's chief rival to the north was Prussia, which included the city of Berlin. Prussia, first emerged as a state, was a strong state in the 1700s, and then was strengthened considerably during the 1800s because it became a key center of production for the German Industrial Revolution. The Prussians, it's important to understand, also developed a unique and well-organized administrative bureaucracy, a bureaucratic structure. Now, who led this bureaucracy? It was basically scholars trained in law, in lawyers. And this is a phenomenon established in Prussia that became characteristic of governmental organizations to the present. Lawyers play a key role in running German government. Okay, the Holy Roman Empire was eventually dissolved in the early 1800s, so we're now starting to come closer to the present and the period in which we can talk about the emergence of engineering. In the early 1800s, 17 states officially withdrew their support and their membership in this empire. Now, the larger context for this change involved the emergence of the Enlightenment, the German Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, and indeed the European Enlightenment. In simplest terms, this new philosophical movement transformed the dominant image that people had of themselves, of everyday people, from that of subjects who were subordinate to and were somehow incorporated into the body of a sovereign. They existed in the sovereign, gained their meaning, their status, in terms of their relationship to the sovereign. They became transformed into citizens, individuals, who were somehow naturally free entities, who then joined together to form nation states through exercises of will. And these nation states would in turn act on their behalf. In the wake of the French and American revolutions in the late 1700s, this emergent concept of the nation state was thus making its way into the German context as well. Much to the consternation, I must point out, of the nobility in Austria and Prussia, who were fearful, very fearful, of these popular revolutions. Now, but nationalist thinking didn't just come from outside. It was also stimulated considerably by German resistance to the invasion by Napoleon in the early 1800s and the subsequent French occupation. After the French were forcibly removed from German territory, the Congress of Vienna in 1814 formally replaced the Holy Roman Empire, formally terminated the Holy Roman Empire and its then 240 states, replaced it with a new confederation, a new German confederation that consisted of only 39 states. This confederation endeavored to participate experiments in liberalism experiments in new forms of government organization without authorizing popular governments, without authorizing a movement to republics. But citizen rebellions in 1848, really across Europe, France included, applied significant further pressure on the nobility, on the hereditary nobility, to permit and develop more liberal governmental institutions, which would be oriented not to the preservation of the hereditary leadership, but to the well-being of the citizenry as a whole. Now, in order to complete this background historical sketch, let's turn to the formal establishment of the German nation-state. The German nation-state that considers itself a whole today traces its foundation back to the establishment of a second empire, the so-called Second Reich, in the 1870s. This genuinely German empire, now specifically German empire, emerged as an extension of the power and the authority of the state of Prussia. You may have heard the name Bismarck, the Prince, Otto von Bismarck, who was a savvy political leader. He built this empire by organizing a northern confederation of 22 states, after which he carried out a successful short 7-week war against Austria, enlisting its cooperation and participation. And then he persuaded William I of Prussia to accept the title of emperor or Kaiser. This authoritative leadership of Prussia, led by Bismarck, who became known as the Iron Chancellor, with its strong German identity, sharply distinguished this new empire, the Second Reich, from the looser coalition that had constituted the First Reich, the Holy Roman Empire. Nevertheless, it's important to recognize and remember that this new empire still preserved the autonomous identities of the constituent states, including even Austria, which had been subordinated to Prussia.